On October 20th, voters will choose the next City Council, Public School Board, and Catholic School Boards in Medicine Hat. Today on Bring Back the Porch, my guest is Jim Groom, who's a retired political science instructor at the Medicine Hat College. I invite you to pull up a chair and join Jim and I as we talk about this very important election in the history of our town. In case you haven't noticed, there's an election underway. Signs are everywhere.
Yes, they really are, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
Although not many on private property. They're all on public property from what I've the odd one, but there's always an indication that how much support you're getting when you can put one on somebody's front lawn as opposed to just in the medians.
And I did notice this morning that our former mayor has a Chris Hellman sign on his lawn that he is publicly displaying on social media this morning. So
very interesting.
You can take whatever you take from that.
Yeah, but, everybody's picking their team and going with it, sort of.
I've been following local politics probably since I moved here in 1978. Okay. I cannot believe or cannot remember a council that had as much difficulty as we've seen in the last 4 years. It has been a whirlwind. It's been a disappointment for, I think, everybody, including those who are sitting on city council. And I think to start out, Jim, I'd just like to get your thoughts on what impact the last 4 years is going to have on the next 4 years and the people who are putting their names in to seek a position on city council.
Well, hopefully it will be a sign of not to do as a council going forward. It used to be that the council was stable. We had Ted Grimm in there forever, and it was just kind of, if you had a pothole, you'd phone him and you'd get that fixed, and that was the extent of the problems that went on, and it seemed very stable until, as you say, Brian, the last 4 years. And ironically, what we were hoping for was a sea change, because there was some concern with the previous administration, and people thought there was a need for change. The big catchphrase at that time was transparency and everything above board and everything. And this council has just turned out, unfortunately, to be a disaster. And I've had a lot of people say that, throw them all out and let's start over. And just, you can't really blame the voter, but ultimately you get what you pick, I guess, to a certain extent in a democracy. And so I don't think anyone would have predicted something as disastrous as what we've seen.
It has certainly been remarkable. It's been almost turned every Monday night council from YouTube into must-see TV because you had to watch to see what was going to happen or not happen.
Yeah, it has become a little bit more exciting that way, hasn't it? Unfortunately, of course, but and it's just, we thought it would be over, and after the court decision, we thought, okay, that's done. And then they decided, they wanted to have an inspection. And then from the it just continued on as a bit of a soap opera that's just gone on and on and on and kept our attention to an extent, for sure.
And hopefully it'll be a lesson for future councils, how not to do it and what pitfalls to avoid and how to manage the minefield.
And I guess it's easy to go back and say, well, it's just personalities. But the inspection report that was done did demonstrate that there was some systemic issues that had to be repaired and some contradictions in bylaws and other things that had to be tweaked. But I think even that report finally said it was basically personalities. They had different approaches to municipal governance, and as a result, the interpretations conflicted, and then the new CAO came in, and that caused more conflicts, and the lawsuits and the legal wrangling and the letters from lawyers, etc., is unprecedented for Medicine Hat from my time here. I haven't seen anything like that before.
The question I had before people started putting their names in to be candidates was how all of that and the public rancor and backlash might affect people who are thinking of becoming a member of city council or at least letting their name stand and maybe going, maybe I don't want to jump into that fire. But we have seen already 30 people who have, as of this morning, who have put their names in. A few of them are repeat candidates from the last time, but a lot of new faces.
33 candidates last time in the election, 30 this year, so far, as you say. And I really think that's a good thing for democracy when we have more involvement. one of the problems is because we have a general election, we don't have ward system. We now have 30 candidates that we're trying to determine who is really quality candidate, who isn't. Last time we went by name recognition to an extent, and people who had reputations that were good, et cetera, et cetera. And because we wanted a change in the mayor's office, we also went in that direction. The voters went in that direction. And of course, how do you differentiate between the quality candidate out of 30 candidates? There may be some personal information that you know this person or that person. You may read their profiles, but reading their profiles, there are a lot of similarities there. Change, transparency, kind of the usual no taxes, no tax increases, which the previous council also said, oh no, we're not going to increase tax. I think that's a standard. With 20% of the population here in Medicine Hat being seniors and on fixed incomes in a lot of cases, the last thing you want to do is aggravate that group. So you want to make promises of no tax increases. Well, you really can't progress as a community without more services and more spending, that even if it's to attract businesses and things of that nature. So the result is that every council is going to put up taxes, even if it's only through the aspect of inflation. You still have to raise some further funds. So it's a little disingenuous, but that's how it goes.
For the voter, they're going to try to say, as you say, figure out, separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yes.
To that end, then all these signs that we're seeing popping up, how does that impact a candidate's hopes? Is the number of signs actually help them, or how does that impact the voter's mentality?
Well, in a municipal election, name recognition means more than in any other level of government. Provincial, federal, name recognition, because getting the message out is very difficult, because it's not really something that the media wants to cover all that much, right? They will give a profile to some, and there'll be websites, etc. But to actually get the substantive nature of their programs or their platforms is really difficult to do. So if you constantly go by and you see John Smith advertised with a sign someplace, and you're in the booth and you're making your selection, and you need 8 candidates for council, and you've got 4 that sometimes it is, gee, I've heard of that person. I'm not sure if it was positive or negative, but, and they get the mark. So I think it actually does impact. As I say, though, if you can put it on people's lawns, it shows that your support from the community is much better than just in the medians. Mm-hmm. But
when that person is in the booth and they're looking at the ballot, 8 to elect, they don't have to choose 8, and that probably is an important thing to point out to people. You don't have to have 8. Your ballot will not be spoiled.
Exactly. It's very true. And it's kind of compelling to think, if you're there to vote and you're a conscientious voter and you have taken the time to do it, I think there's a bit of a compulsion to say, I've got to do the 8. But as you say, it's not required, and you don't spoil a ballot. You could go in and pick one, or spoiler ballot for that matter, if you wanted to make some kind of a esoteric kind of a comment of some sort. But yeah, I think it is sort of a psychological compulsion that people want to make some kind of a mark so they can say they've done their duty. And this is their chance once every 4 years to express themselves. I think they do want to do that. And
you mentioned the 4-year term. As I was sitting yesterday preparing for our little get-together, it occurred to me that once upon a time, councils were 2-year terms. Then they became 3-year terms.
3-year terms.
And now it's 4.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if 4 years maybe is too long because they get complacent. The sense of urgency is lost because, we've got 4 years to do this now, so we don't have to, really put the pedal to the metal here.
Yeah, I think there's an argument for both sides, because if you notice this council in particular, they've deferred things over and over and over again to the point where, and rightly so in some cases, where they want a further study, they want more in-depth decisions, especially when it came to spending money. They were fiscally responsible, I think, in that regard. And so sometimes 2 years would be like, we didn't get anything accomplished because we just kept asking for more reviews and more insight. 4 years, with a really dysfunctional council, like we've seen over these 4 years, it seems to be interminable. It's going on forever. And it's like, how do we make this end? Unfortunately, in a way, so they went to Minister McIver and they said, we've got a problem here. Can you help us solve it? And he said, no, solve it yourself, pretty much. And so they spent a lot of time with the whole aspect of ethics and having a commissioner in order to deal with that. And then when they did it, along with a lot of other municipalities in Alberta, then the minister came out and said, no, we're going to take it over anyway. And they put them to all that effort and work in order to intervene. And of course, we see from the provincial government, there's a lot of hands-on. There's a lot of, if we look at Bill 20, amendments of the Election Act, et cetera, that they actually at one point proposed that they could rescind any bylaws and they could recall any member of council or the mayor. Now they backed that off a little bit in the end, but they are very much wanting to control as much as they possibly can. And we've seen this with the fact that you can have political parties in Edmonton and Calgary, even though 80% of the Alberta municipalities, when they held a little straw vote at their convention, 80% of them said, no, we don't want political parties. And the next thing was, okay, well, we'll compromise, but we just have it in the big cities, the ones that we really want to control those councils because we're tired of conflicting with progressive voters in those cities. So they relented somewhat, but they've still pushed it forward.
And that brings me to my next question. We've seen that there is the ability to have political parties, slates in the two big cities. Right. Not so much in Medicine Hat, but that doesn't mean that 7 or 8 people can't get together and say, look, we're going to all be united here and we'll all run individually, but then when election day comes, if we get 5 or 6, we control the council and we control the agenda.
Yeah, so, the biggest complaint you get from the parliamentary system out of federally or provincially is party loyalty, because party loyalty takes precedence over the constituency's desires or needs. And in the stat that they quote out of Ottawa is 94% of the time the MPs vote with the party. And there's people in their local constituencies, they now have to go back to and sell the party's position to the person in that constituency. And with municipal government, really this is the closest government to the people, really. That when you need the garbage picked up or you have a complaint about your park not being cut, the grass being cut on it or whatever, you want to go to them, and it's very personal. And if you have a slate that has to vote as a block because they said they would, and it contradicts what your desires are, you don't feel represented. And I think that's a problem. And the difference between a ward system, of course, and the general election aspect of it, or the open election for Medicine Hat is that you don't really have an individual representing just you. You have the entire city represented by the council. So your feelings that you're being represented is even less so than if you have a ward system where you could phone that individual. And in the ward system, which of course both the big cities have, they're now in the position where do they represent their constituents? Do they represent the voters in their area? Or do they represent their party and their party's positions? And if the two conflict, then where's your ethics stand at that point? What do you do? So Vancouver's had it for a long time, and a few other cities, and there's both good and bad to it. But that's the most common complaint I've heard, is that it's party loyalty takes precedence over individual wants and needs, which works in the parliamentary system at the federal and provincial level, but I don't think it's very effective at a municipal level.
Special interest groups, we've seen one in particular, the utility ratepayers group, was born out of a dissatisfaction with high utility rates.
Yeah.
They coalesced into a group, and now they even have their own office and whatnot. And yeah. I'm sure that some of these people who are running are aligned with that group. it is, I guess, democracy in action, because they identified one problem that was bothering them, and now they're going to take it all the way through to city council.
Absolutely. It's what can be done. Interest groups are rampant in all communities, I think. If you have, we had a situation in Minnesota where they were trying to do infill in some of the local communities, and those areas that were being affected directly showed up at council en masse and made their voice heard, and that piece of property in particular still is not being developed. So it can be very effective, and if you have 100 voters and they have 100 friends who have 100 friends, and politicians know that, and they really want to make the choices that are best for the entire community, but sometimes they have to take into consideration that small areas do have a point. And with the ratepayers, of course, agreement, I mean, everybody was impacted by the sudden changes and the increases in tax in the rate for utilities, et cetera. And yeah, it's something that hits home with a lot of folks.
I think prior to the last election, there was some talk that maybe it was time for Medicine to sell the goose that laid the golden egg and to divest itself of its utilities. Yeah. And then we saw the shift where a lot of money was coming in that was helping to run our cities. So I don't know if that's going to be an issue in this campaign or not.
It's a little bit like the goods and services tax provincially, or the provincial sales tax provincially, because the party that puts that in place will never be heard of again. So it will completely destroy them. And I think most politicians recognize that that's such a big step. And some years we get lots of money. Some years we need to invest in money in it. It's almost sacrosanct. And to sell that off for a short-term gain, in some cases, people would be up in arms. On the other hand, if we look at the way the cost of energy is going and the alternative choices for energy, and are we sort of leading ourselves to oblivion when it's finally said that oil and gas is no longer the way to produce electricity? We need an alternative, but that's a lot of years off the road. And I would project that if a mayor came in and said to the council, this is what we're doing, and they kind of pushed it forward and they sold the utilities, I don't think we'd hear from them again. They'd be out the door, because a lot of people have the perception, and the true perception, that some years we make millions of dollars on that utility service, other years not so much.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier the senior population, 20% of Medicine, they vote.
They do.
They carry a lot of weight at the ballot box. I'm wondering, though, about the younger people, because this is their future in this city. And what do we do to get them excited and get them involved in the political process and actually go and cast a ballot?
Yeah, we do have both this council, the current council, and the potential future council. We have a few young folks who have expressed interest, which hopefully will draw more people in. The difficulty, of course, with our system is we have 30 people running this year. You're a young family, you're raising your kids, you're going to hockey practice, you're going to ballet or whatever the kids are doing. Do you really have time to look at those 30 candidates and say, okay, what do I really think of these folks? And although there is a compulsion for some people to vote, on the other hand, there's folks who say, I don't know the candidates. I haven't got the time to dwell on all the details here. I can't vote for anybody. Now, if someone from the previous council, other than Andy McGrogan, decides to run, there may be a point there that I'm going to go out and vote just so that person doesn't get in, or to block them somehow. This has been an ongoing question forever. How do you really inspire young people to get in and vote? They've got so much going on in their lives, whereas, like I say, the seniors population can take their time, and it's historical. If we look at the 70s and 80s and the voter turnouts, 70-80% voter turnout, federally and provincially anyway, was very common. Municipal elections, we're lucky to get 40%. at the best of times. And you're right. The seniors folks will go to great lengths to make sure that they can vote, and it's good for them. And I think the politicians understand that, but their big issue is affordability. And once again, how do you not increase taxes in order to provide those services for the young people we just talked about? You know, the big issue here is putting a center on the south side of town, the sports center on the south side of town. So how do we really galvanize a population to support that when we don't want to raise taxes? And so and young people don't want taxes raised either. I mean, their affordability is huge for them, especially with the cost of living, and rent has gone skyrocketed and things of that nature.
Yeah. There's always a question when a candidate says, I will not raise taxes. So the other question that you don't hear is, what are you going to cut?
Yes.
To keep the budget in line. And that's what you don't hear until after an election.
Yes. And that's the way the politicians are. Nobody wants to run on an unpopular position, you know, and they sort of skew reality a little bit, I think, in order to say that this is their position. And you'll notice in a lot of their biographies is that it's very firm. It's like, I'm not going to do this, period, or I am going to do this, period. And then when they get into the reality of being on council, they have to cooperate with all the others, including the mayor, of course. And they also have to look at the physical aspect of it. And do we really have the money? You can come in and say, I'm going to run on having a nice facility on the south side of Medicine Hat. But then the prices come in, and it's like, gee, can we really afford that? So the reality sets in, I think, pretty quick.
When an elector is considering who they're going to vote for, I wonder how much social media has played now in the role of a campaign, because you know how much disinformation that social media has, and all the Karens and the keyboard warriors, that all enters into the discussion. And I don't know how much that impacts what we get at the end.
Yeah, it's a new reality for sure. Now, we talk to seniors. Seniors are probably the least affected by social media, but they can be affected by disinformation still. And, of course, one of the concerns that I have is with the school boards. So the Take Back Alberta group has made it very clear that they are providing training and various sessions with people who want to go onto a school board in your local communities. And they've told them, don't tell them what your objectives are, but the objectives are to put us back 100 years so that our school children don't have access to science, and, you know, we talk various aspects that are not reflective of modern society, in my opinion. And they make it very clear that they want to make those school boards follow their positions politically, and they're willing to galvanize. I mean, they were able to get rid of Premier Kenney pretty much through their operations. So this is something that's quite concerning, and it's not really social media per se. It's a very organized approach, and it does offer a threat. And if you go right back to 1999, when Daniel Smith was on the school board in Calgary, the school board became so dysfunctional that I think it was Lyle Oldberg was the education minister at the time, came in and fired every one of them, even though they had been elected, and closed them down because they had become that dysfunctional. And unfortunately, I'm concerned that may be something we have to watch provincially more than just in Medicine Hat, that school boards be taken over. Just over 50% of the school boards people elected are through acclamation. They don't have enough interest in people running for those positions because they're thankless, they're hard work and little reward for it. As a result, it makes a big opening for people to come in and take over control of those boards. And all they need is a majority vote, and they can bring in things into the curriculum that would be like really? Why are we putting that in? And we only have to look at the banning of the books that's gone on lately with the UCP that has become very contentious, and that's the direction they would like to see things go in. So it could be ugly, I think.
Speaking of school board elections, there's also a specter of a teachers' strike as we enter into the election campaign period. And I don't know how that would impact anything.
I think it would have more impact, of course, provincially, because the province has they passed legislation in 2023 that united the approach. So anything provincial is done by the province, and anything kind of having a local, it can still be done by the local boards. And I think it would make the local community aggravated, and they might think, well, let's see if we can vote a certain direction. But the boards that are in place have very little control of anything, I think, in reality. I'm not sure if the average electorate would really have that appreciation of that. It may force them to come forward and say, well, I'm going to vote for the person who says let's not allow teachers to strike or something, or let's get the government on side and get them working on this so that we can get the teachers back. It would make them angry, but I'm not sure there's a solution. And so I'm not sure how much impact it would have for like turnout or things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Another little wrinkle that is particular to Medicine Hat in this campaign is Drew Barnes' candidacy for mayor. If he is successful in becoming the mayor, then he is the mayor of Medicine Hat, and the MLA for part of Medicine Hat is Danielle Smith, and
I
they
think
have locked horns in the past, so
Yes.
I wonder how that would impact our city.
Yeah, when Daniel Smith walked across the floor in the legislature that joined the Progressive Conservatives, Drew Barnes was one of 5 MLAs who remained Wild Rose. And I have to tell you that at that time I said, well, that's it. The Wild Rose Party is toast. They've got 5 MLAs, and there's their leader and 8 other MLAs walked across the floor to join the PCs. That they're done. And the exact opposite occurred. It galvanized the Wild Rose. They were angry. They were mad at her. She never got even nominated for the Progressive Conservative nomination in High River. And Drew Barnes went on to continue to be an MLA. However, we know that when he was removed from the caucus, the United Conservative Party caucus, by Jason Kenney, there was a choice that could be made by Premier Smith, who, when she became premier, to let him back in the fold, and she deferred and said, no, you're not coming in. And I think part of that was his position on the study that was done throughout the province by Jason Kenney, and Drew Barnes was a part of that committee, and he came out with kind of the opposite approach that the general committee came out with. And there was people on that committee who said, we don't even know what settings Drew had, because when we sat and heard people, we didn't come up with the same conclusions. Right? So it was determined that he was no longer a team player, and I think Daniel Smith recognized it wouldn't be a team player. And, I'm not sure how much cooperation is between municipalities and the province now anyway. It tends to be very dictatorial. The province has made it very clear that these municipalities fall under their auspices. Bill 19 and 20 and I think 21 all sort of put that in place and said, as an example, Bill 19 said, if you're going to get any funding for the federal government, it has to come through our approval first, right? Bill 20 is, of course, all the changes to the election, and it made it very, very clear that, right down to hand ballot counting and all these other aspects, is that the province is in charge and the municipalities are a subservient level of government, which is true by legislation and by the Constitution. It is true. But they are enforcing that quite directly. It's nice to have a mayor who could pick up the phone and say, Daniel, I'd like to talk to you about a certain issue. I would think that would be a hang-up call for Drew Barnes. But who knows? He could, in politics, there are strange bedfellows, mm-hmm. and you have to be very thick-skinned and very forgiving in order to get what you want out of your political position. So I would think that it would be would be complicated.
It would be interesting.
Yes, it would be interesting
Very
to be a fly on the wall and things, as they say, right?
Yeah. Every campaign that I can remember over the last 40 years, one of the key themes has been economic development. You hear economic development every campaign.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because if it's a continuing issue, nothing's being done. Yeah. I don't know what can be done by an individual council.
Well, the province determined that we had an economic corridor between Edmonton and Calgary, and it extended down to Lethbridge. And that was their determination that everything was going to be in there. The Premier talked about Red Deer being 1 million people at some point, and that was her kind of dream, I guess, or aspect to it. Like it or not, Medicine Hat is just so far removed from those big centers that it is difficult to attract people here. Now, we have a great standard of living. We have a great community. Community involvement is terrific. But what have we got really that we can say, this is unique? Come here. You're 3 hours away from Calgary. You can fly in and out of here, though, on the small planes, etc. But yeah, it's difficult. It would be nice if Suffield was developed for the aviation aspects and the drones and things a little bit more, if we had federal government input in that regard. But we now know that, of course, any federal government investment virtually has to be approved by the province, and now you would hope that they would be positive for that. The twinning of Highway 3. The province said they were going to twin Highway 3, and then they said, but it's going to be over 10 years, and we have these different phases that are going on. I'm not sure if there's a magic bullet. We often talked about our connections to the states and improving the border crossings and things. Not sure we could do much more. We have a pretty fair highway going to the states. Once you hit the other side in Montana, it's not much of a highway down there, though. And so they have a brand new American passport section there, or customs. Canada's still this little old house. As I haven't been down through a long time, but it's not much to speak of. I'm not sure what we do to increase and improve that. Even our agricultural sector is pretty standard and pretty dependable, thanks to irrigation. But what else could you put here that would be like, oh, this is ideal to this community, and no other place would have the same wherewithal?
Do we need a council that sells our city, actually goes out and beats the bushes and gets the business, as opposed to having it farmed out to an economic development either department or outside agency?
Yeah. I do think that the mayor's role should include that.
Like Harry Viner used to.
Yes, and I don't think the council should do it, because unfortunately people are people, and you get different messages going out. I think a unified message from the mayor's office, now it should be the mayor themselves, but it could also be their office, but that's the only full-time person in the organization. Theoretically, that's the only person that has the time to actually go out and do that and recruit that way, I would think. I would think that goes a long way. When you show up for a meeting to drum up business, and you introduce yourself as a consultant for the city of Medicine Hat, et cetera, people kind of, I imagine. But if you go and you say, I'm the mayor from the city of Medicine Hat, we have a population of X, and we have good opportunities here, and they say to you, okay, so specifically, what can you offer us? The mayor might be in a much better position to say, okay, these are the offers we have. Inexpensive utilities, or whatever the case would be, development for housing for your employees, et cetera, or a ready and willing to be employed sector. I mean, our unemployment rate just hit 7% for Medicine Hat, and 8.4% for the province. We should have people, but are they qualified? The college here is a wonderful facility. Expanding that college and keeping the connection between the city and the college open is tremendous. And if they could exploit that to their fullest, it would be beneficial too.
I'm wondering if the last 4 years have had a disincentive for business to come to Medicine Hat, because from the outside they're looking at it going, oh boy, what a bunch of hillbillies. maybe the first thing a new council should do is some sort of a PR campaign. I'm thinking of Ronald Reagan. It's Morning in America. You know, the restarting of everything. We're new, we're fresh, we're ready.
Yeah, we've had a couple of those kind of operations at one time. Weren't we the Sun City at one point? And physically, it comes down once again. How much do you spend on that? And are you looking for tourist dollars, or are you looking for an industry? I mean, ideally, like you say, diversification industry is what we really need. Something come in. It doesn't have to be the Ford Motor Company, or it can be a smaller niche market that employs another 100 people, another 70 people, whatever the case may be. But what exactly? I think that market is so niche that you have to target it specifically. So the campaign approach, like a machete, doing surgery with a machete a little bit, and you need a scalpel to say, what have we got here that really would be attractive to X or Y company? And you might have to think of incentives of some sort. The big cities do that. Tax breaks, of course. We've run into problems with that on some cases, but I mean, there has to be something tangible, because business doesn't want to relocate without some incentives that are going to impact their bottom line, and so whatever you can get for that aspect is going to have to be pretty precise, I think. So I think the mayor going out and showing the flag at every and any event that they possibly can in some way, shape, or form, but I still think it should be targeted to, there's a potential for this group to leave that city because the cost of energy is too much, and that's a big part of their bottom line, as opposed to, other considerations. And it's tough, but it would be a very niche market, I think.
Another campaign issue that I think is going to be front and center is the issue of the homeless people in Medicine Hat. You can't walk down the street in downtown Medicine Hat and not see it. Right now, the mustard seed has been sort of a political football that may or may not have landed up in the Briar Park area. That remains to be seen, but that is an issue that this next council is going to have to tackle head on.
Yeah, that's one of the failings of this council, I think, has been that issue. And once again, I think they've deferred it, and then, the debacle that occurred with the mustard seed was like, just seemed kind of, it demonstrated their dysfunction more than anything else. I think, well, there was other things too, but I mean, it was a demonstration of a dysfunctional council. And you're right. We have to deal with that issue. One of the aspects, of course, is that it's also a national issue. And, of course, the federal government back in the 70s used to provide a lot of money for affordable housing. And then in the 80s, under the neoliberal approach, they said, well, we're going to download that to the provinces without any cash incentive going with it. And then the provinces said, well, geez, that didn't seem fair, so we're going to download it to the municipalities, but no money, just downloading it. And now, of course, the builders kind of folded up their tents and said, well, the heck with affordable housing, that's not going to be where it's at. And they built $1 million homes instead of affordable homes because there was no incentive for them to do it. And now, I used to live in Vancouver, and East Hastings was this tent city that was just like something else. But before that period of time, we had co-op housing out in Langley and a few different things, and it worked very well. You could, very affordable. It's hard to find that anywhere now. So the city doesn't have the wherewithal, though, to do this alone. They have to get the province on side, and they have to get the feds on side. And that's a bureaucracy that's, not particularly jiving. They're clashing quite a bit, and it could be really challenging to get that result. Because you could do short-term things like, okay, yeah, we've got some beds that we can put up here and, some food vouchers or whatever the case may be. But for a long term, to get people off the street, you need affordable housing, and they need that pride of ownership, and it brings their life up, and it makes them feel, good about themselves, and it really benefits them. And I'm afraid that's not just a municipal thing, although it hits us municipally. But for long-term solutions, we need the other two levels of government to get in. Otherwise, it's sort of a Band-Aid solution, and we do need a Band-Aid solution, but but how long will it last for?
For a long time, one of the slogans for the city of Medicine Hat was the city with energy. Of course, that was referring to natural gas and then later oil and electricity. But now, solar energy is moved to the forefront. The city is invested in the solar project up in Briar Park.
Yeah.
Some people see it as a boondoggle. Other people see it as a potential to, I guess, ensure when the oil and gas runs out.
Yeah.
This council probably will have to make a decision, the one that is coming in, that'll be elected. So I think that's probably something that people will want to ask their candidates, where do you stand?
Yes, and I think the community is very divided because we've always been an oil and gas province and an oil and gas community, and solar is seen as a threat by some. And, we have to look to the south in the United States where they've literally banning solar power now. And it does make you kind of wonder. But I think there's an argument to be had for solar. The province has kind of put encumbrances in place. They put a moratorium on for, 9 or 10, 12 months, which lost us millions of dollars of investment. And as a result, I think we're a little following behind, trying to catch up. And, a prime time of this was Drew Barnes was reported saying that solar decision was a terrible decision, that we should never have a solar panel in the north. So he's declared his position for that. What are the other candidates for mayor saying? And, I don't think anybody's really come out and said how they position themselves. This last council, when Bill 20 was passed, which changes how elections are done and the controls by the province, the only one to speak against it was Andy McGrogan. The mayor, the councillors, they all deferred. They didn't want to say anything. Now, is it because the province is so threatening to them that they don't want to be seen as opposing anything the province does? Or did they not have a position on it? So there's a lot of issues out there where the council has been pretty quiet and really hasn't said much. And then when they do say something, sometimes it's not a united determination. And now, if they go into camera to discuss it, we all say, well, that's not transparency. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. I wouldn't want to be a mayor or a council of a small city or community for all the love or money, you might say, because it's a thankless position for sure.
I'm also wondering too, Jim, we had a provincial election just over 2 years ago, federal election at the end of this past April. Now we're at the municipal election level. Voter fatigue going to be a problem?
I think the last federal election was a bit of voter fatigue at that point, and I think people were feeling it. And the only thing that kept it alive was the threats from Donald Trump and the annexation of Canada and those discussions. This one, I think there's a bit of a space, other than the fact that there's always a low turnout on municipal elections. I think the record is like 22% or something in Fort McMurray or something one year. I mean, it's hard to get people keen about garbage collection or patching your roads and things like that. And if you look at it narrowly like that, that's fine. But if you look at it as, well, they also determine my tax rate and what my property value is, and all these things that are very close to you, then you would start to think maybe it is more. But there's always going to be, and we, political scientists always look at the turnout to be able to say, is democracy working or not? Because if you only get 40% of the voting population out, and that person who, say, becomes mayor out of one of the three only gets 33% of that we now have a council and mayor that represents, was elected by like 25% of the population in some cases, and things like that. And you kind of think, is that a fair system? But that's the system we have, and it's democratic. And sometimes people look back and say, well, I didn't vote, but I wish it had turned out differently. Well, as they say, you have to vote and make your choices.
Yeah, I always say 40% of the people voted, but 100% of the people will have an opinion.
Well, true.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah,
Jim,
very true.
very enjoyable. I always enjoy sitting down and chatting with you. And if you liked what you heard today, we hope that you'll hit the like button and share it with your friends so that more people become part of the conversation here on the porch. Jim, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to talk to you.